Good evening, everyone, and welcome on this really cold and blustery westerly evening. You can tell it's Ekka Eve. I'm Jane Cowell. I'm Director of Engagement and Partnerships and like to welcome you all to State Library of Queensland this evening. I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of this land, especially as we're talking about land tonight, and pay respects to their ancestors who came before them and their elders past, present and future. The location of State Library is on Kurupa Point, and we're very proud that historically it was a significant meeting, gathering, sharing and learning place for Aboriginal people, and we proudly continue that tradition here tonight. And it's what we do at State Library is actually share culture, share learning, and we really feel that it's influenced by the land on which the library stands. I also acknowledge and welcome our event partner, the ABC, in particular tonight's facilitator and 612 ABC Brisbane radio presenter, Kelly Higgins-Devine. And without our ABC partner, these conversations wouldn't be shared so broadly, and with them being broadcast, they get shared across a much broader audience than just us tonight. Our four panellists who will be sharing their insights and stories with us today are Georgie Somerset, Michael Connolly, Dr. Maggie Hardy and Ewan Rockemer. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, State Library is a place for communities to come together, to share stories, to share knowledge, to learn, to be inspired and to create. We are and really work very hard to be a community hub where everyone is encouraged to have a voice, regardless of where that voice comes from. So it can be a diverse voice, a refugee voice, a distinguished elder voice. It's a voice, and diverse voices are celebrated here at State Library. We welcome our online viewers and invite you and our live audience to join the conversation online using the hashtag #BelongingQueensland, which I think is up there. Or when Kelly throws to the audience for questions later in the evening, you can also tweet your questions or tweet your comments on those questions. This year, State Library is exploring the theme of belonging, and through the Queenslanders in Conversation panel series, we aim to get people talking about our individual and collective identities and our sense of belonging to our family, to our communities, and to our state. The imagery you see on the backdrop tonight is inspired by cover illustrations from the historic The Queenslander magazines in our collection. Inspiration was drawn from magazine images to form the interactive installation currently in the info zone on level 1, and I encourage you to pop in and see our exhibitions and on both level 4, level 2 and level 1. And the library shop also sells quite a lot of posters from these historic magazines, and you can see those during opening hours. You may have also noticed that some of the slides feature other SLQ programming that's happening over the coming months. If you'd like any further information on these events or exhibitions, have a chat to one of our staff after the evening or head to our website, and we also have a number of brochures on the registration desk which you can pick up on your way out. Again, we're very proud to be partnering with ABC for tonight's Queenslander Conversation talk, and I'm pleased to now hand over to tonight's facilitator, Kelly Higgins-Devine.
Well, good evening and welcome. I just wanted to know how many people are actually not from Brisbane in here tonight. Do we have anyone who's... Yeah, a few? Okay, but mostly from Brizzy. Well, welcome one and all. And as I mentioned, this is the third in our series of Queenslanders in Conversation, and thank you to the State Library of Queensland for being such a wonderful partner. We've had two of these already, Queenslanders and Multiculturalism and Queenslanders and Sport. But as we feel those westerlies blow through Brisbane, we always know what that means. That means it's Ekka time. So as rural and regional Queenslanders make their way to the city to show off their produce or perhaps get some ribbons for their stock, we thought it was timely to have a discussion about living off the land. And you only have to travel around this state to realise just how big it is. I remember when I first started in commercial radio, I was in 4BC, and someone from Melbourne rang up and said, "Oh, there's a press conference happening in Townsville. Do you reckon you could get there?" And it was a bit, well, Townsville's about as far away as you are, Possum, so I don't think I'll be driving it in the next 3 hours. So people don't understand if they've never seen a map of Australia or really paid attention to it, or if they don't understand distance, I think, in the way that maybe West Australians and Queenslanders understand distance. Queensland is the world's sixth largest subnational entity with an area of just over 1.85 million square kilometres. And our industries are diverse: bananas, strawberries, ginger, pineapples, wineries, a myriad of other fruit and veggie crops. There's wineries, peanuts and grain crops, aquaculture, wineries, cattle and cotton, tourism, sugarcane, wool, there are wineries, and of course, mining industries. Did I mention wineries? Yeah. So how would you describe your connection to Queensland if someone was to ask you, is it home? And how do you know it is home? I know because every time I fly into Brisbane from somewhere else, I see the city and I know I'm home, that this will forever feel like home to me, looking at my house as we cruise into Brisbane Airport. So how for you do you know that the place where you are is home? How do we combine those aspects of land, heritage and agriculture? More of Queensland's surface area is devoted to agriculture than any other state in Australia. So how does that relationship to the land shape who we are? How do we preserve and protect the land for future generations? And how can we do that when our opinions on that differ greatly? Please welcome your panellists this evening who are going to discuss this very issue of living off the land. Firstly, Michael Connolly. Michael's an Aboriginal artist based near Brisbane. He's a descendant of the Kulilla tribe from the Thargomindah and Yulo area of Queensland. Michael has recently been back to his traditional homeland to walk country, which we're going to hear about this evening. Please welcome Michael. Dr. Maggie Hardy is a scientist and researcher based at the University of Queensland. She has a particular interest in insecticides and whether they can be used in sustainable agriculture. Dr. Hardy is also passionate about educating the public through her work as a science communicator. Dr. Maggie Hardy. Ewan Rockemer is a young beef farmer. He spends his days raising cattle at Gagoomgan. I hope I've said that not even close. So we will get the correct pronunciation of that in just a moment. That's about an hour west of Maryborough. Have I done all right with that one? Yeah, okay. Ewan is the fifth generation of his family to be involved in his business. Please welcome Ewan. And Georgie Somerset is Vice President of the rural lobby group AgForce Queensland and a beef producer with experience in agribusiness, rural tourism and regional development. She's passionate about the land and the opportunity it provides. Georgie divides most of her time between the cattle yard and the schoolyard in the South Burnett area. Georgie Somerset. Okay, well, let's start off with the land itself. Michael, you're a Kulilla man who walked country recently near Charleville. What does that mean to walk country?
Well, as an Aboriginal person, when you go back on country, and as the old people would say, you sleep in the dirt, because you've got to connect to your spirituality of country and what it means. Because my family were from Thargomindah, Quilpie, down to Yulo, and my mother comes from over at Gadooga way, so she's Murrawari. And when you're out on country, you've got to connect to feel what it means as an Aboriginal person and what has been missing and what I've learnt too. You know, we lived in towns, Dad and them were drovers and shearers and truck drivers, and we learned all that stuff at home. So to go out and sit on country, I call it defragging the mind these days, because my business runs on computers, as we do, the rest of us. I travel the world, and just to go and sit on country and just clear it and hear the birds and see the country and let country talk to you and let it sing to you. And that's the passion I have when I sit on country. It's a great feeling. Very good.
Can a non-Aboriginal Australian have that connection to country?
Well, we start looking as a human race, because I think we've all missed the plot, the human race, because we talk about food, as we're going to mention, food, how we survive. So if you ask the young ones, go back on country and what can you eat? If they haven't got this, they don't know what they're looking at, see? And I take my kids out and show them. And we went out on on the mining with the seismic lines a couple of years ago, and just going through and teaching my own people that have never been on country. They were brought away from the end of the city, and to go and sit out as Aboriginal people, but also as the non-Indigenous fellows that were with us, the blokes doing all the seismic lines and that, they didn't know what it meant. To them, it was just digging a hole, taking mines out. So I think as humans, we have to think about the human race, of what we're missing, the food we can eat, the fresh foods, because all the poison we have in our body, the cancers, everything is done by chemicals, because 5% of the world want to give us more chemicals so they can survive for their money. But if we go back to natural medicines, back to natural foods, fresh air, instead of being Pokemon, we can walk around country, well, then it'd be great, you know. We can make the same thing. We could say, well, let's find a tree that looks like this and walk to it. You know, so we need walk, sit on country as a human race, not as gender or as race, I suppose, races of the world, just human race.
Georgie, what does connection to country mean for you?
Yeah, listening to Michael, I can completely relate to that. It's, you know, there's a... Kel, you talked about flying into Brisbane. For me, I spend a lot of time travelling between home, which is about 4 hours away, and Brisbane. And there's nothing quite like turning that corner and for the last sort of 2 kilometres home. But I'm probably more fortunate because I get to split my time between being busy down here and meetings and things and actually getting back there. And I always say that I just couldn't do what I do if I didn't ground myself back on the farm. So for me, it's the trees, it's the landscape. It's where I raise my family, and I have a real feel for that country. And I think it's not the same, but I think it is that we live with it. We live with the rhythms of the seasons. I notice my kids, they go away to boarding school, they go away to university, they come back, they want to get out into the paddocks. It's actually wanting to be back out with the landscape that they're used to, or that they've grown up in and they understand. So I love the way Michael said it's not necessarily about what race you are, but actually about opening yourself up to that feeling of country and being able to sit with it and actually be quite comfortable with it. That's a really special thing to do.
Ewan?
Being fifth generation, it's not only the dirt that we work is not only ingrained in my hands, it's actually runs in my blood. Each day, every day, we're out in the paddock, we're with the land, we're working with the land. And the environment as well, and being connected the whole time. That's my connection to the land. It's not only what we do for a business side of things. It's everything. It's almost an emotional, maybe, connection. Yeah.
And Maggie?
I would say probably home is where the lab is. So, you know, for a lot of scientists, we have to move around the world to do our jobs. I'm originally from Boston on the east coast of the U.S., and my family has been there for around about 400 years. So we can trace my bloodline back to the Pilgrims that came over. So my people have a long history of colonization, which I think complicates the whole issue because, you know, I'm very mindful, I guess, of the role that white people have played in the, you know, subsequent demise of a number of Indigenous people pretty much everywhere, I would say. And I'm mindful as well of the impact that science can have on that colonization as we try to, you know, navigate our increasing knowledge about the human condition, about the environment around us, and try to kind of root that in what we know as people and as humans, and we try to work with people of different cultures to solve problems. But we can't just come in as scientists and just say this is the only way to do things from now on. We have to be, you know, we have to incorporate the local knowledge with the work that we're doing. So, you know, for me, I work with the venom of funnel web spiders and tarantulas. So I'm really lucky to go to Fraser Island and collect those beautiful spiders. And I've done some work with pit vipers in Central America. And, you know, getting out into the field and actually working with these kind of animals is definitely, it's a very heightened experience as a way to travel because you get to really, you know, take your life in your hands while you're on Fraser.
Yeah, picking up spiders and stuff. Sounds great.
It is. Best job in the world, I reckon.
But how much then do you have to know about the land to find out where those little critters are going to be?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. It's you know, you're kind of like a super tourist. You know where all the funnel web spiders are, but not where to get milk and bread on a Sunday night. So we're, you know, my useful set of skills as a Queenslander may not be that big, but you know, if you ever need a spider ID'd, I can do the woman for you. It's always a huntsman, by the way. In case you're wondering, if it's on a wall, it's a huntsman. Funnel webs can't climb. So Anything that's on your wall, you're good. As a pro tip, that one's free.
They know they're not allowed in my house. I let them roam free outside.
It's good to have boundaries. You gotta have boundaries, showers, things like that. Yeah.
Mostly they're respected. But okay, I want to just put to the panel then. Do you think that different groups of people have different types of connection to land, and is it unfair to expect every connection to be a spiritual connection to land, or does it have to be a spiritual connection? Who wants to throw in on that one first? Michael?
Well, to me, it's spiritual. And I think if the human race look at it, where we come from originally, I think it's spiritual. I know now we go fishing, camping, barbecuing, whatever. But when you see a bloke sit on a river fishing with a beer or whatever, he's still connecting spiritually, I reckon. Because he's still got to connect with what he does within himself. And when you look inside yourself, spiritually, it tells a story of why you're sitting on that ground or why you're walking in that bush. It said, sister here, she's chasing spiders. Other people chase birds. We all have a job as environmentalists in this country or in the world. So when you're walking on country or fishing or sleeping or whatever, you're there for a reason, to get away from the rat race, as they say, defragging the mind, taking the kids out, show them where you come from, show them what's the camp, to get that feel of country and get the feel of away from the way the hustle and bustle of the cities are. So that's what I see.
Yeah, one of the things I think Michael's talking about too is the slowing down, the defragging and the powers of observation. And I think that's, when you've been in one place for a long time, you actually probably take that for granted, because you actually notice the changes and the bits and pieces. And there's something really special about someone else sharing their country with you as well. And I've had the good fortune of having some people walk me into their country and help me see it through their eyes and see the stories, but even just the flora and the fauna through their eyes. And so I think too, part of it is actually just slowing down enough to see what's around you. And when we have other people come and stay and visit, and look, my landscapes, there's a garden. It's just I'm not there a lot to do it. So basically, what we look out onto is native forest country. So we have beautiful ironbarks and narrowleafs and so forth. And we're just looking out over rolling hills, but it's really just paddocks. And so for me, every day is different. And I can sit there on the veranda and I'll see a whole range of things. But what I've learned is that when people come to visit, they don't see what I see. So you have to actually give them a chance to interpret that or understand it. And I think some of it is just learning to slow down, because we live such busy lives now, and we think we've got to fill every moment of our life, and to actually slow down and enjoy the seasons and just be where you are and be still is part of what it takes, I think, to just ground yourself back wherever you are.
Talking about trees, today, of course, Georgie, you were part of the AgForce March on Parliament to protest against the tightening of land clearing regulations. Yeah. These are issues that come up often, especially tree clearing in Queensland. Can you explain to the city folk who may not know why is it important for you to keep clearing trees when we're thinking, haven't you cleared enough trees?
Yeah. So in fact, while there is a perception that there's a lot of trees being cleared in Queensland, in fact our tree cover in Queensland has thickened significantly in the last 10 years. I think it's a 400,000 hectare thickening. We've got the most amazing climate in Queensland where things keep growing. Mm-hmm. And the cycle for our tree regrowth on our property is about 8 to 10 years. So if I take out a tree, when I come back in about 8 to 10 years' time, there will be at least one more tree grown there, and possibly more, because that's the climate we have. In southern states, it's not the same climate. They've taken trees out and they don't come back, but our climate is incredibly productive. And we also have a different range of trees in Queensland to southern states, which is an interesting thing too. We have things like mulga, which is not actually a tree. You actually bend the tree over. The stock can eat it during a drought, but the tree bounces back up again and grows. It's just this amazing regenerative capacity to actually, feed something and keep growing. And then we have things like natural disasters. So in fact, after cyclones and floods, we have enormous tree growth. So one of our challenges in Queensland is that we have far more trees than anyone else in Australia, and what we were marching for today was to have some fairness so that the laws don't keep changing. We've had 38 changes to the legislation in recent years, and as Ewan said, he's 5th generation. We're multi-generational. We've got children back in our business as well. They're 20 and 21, and we're trying to make plans for the next 20 and 30 years. And so if the legislation changes 30 times in the next 20 years, we don't know what we can plan for. So we're actually wanting some reasonable ability to plan, but we do actually, if we want to feed Australia and the world, which is one of those things that the Queensland economy is predicted to grow, and agriculture is incredibly positive industry to be in. But if we don't keep having our tree clearing, we will end up with pockets of country, well, quite a lot of country that just can't be used for anything. It will actually become quite degraded. The Indigenous guys actually had this all under control because they burnt country. So they burnt and they grazed and they managed their tree growth so that it didn't thicken. And in fact, Queensland didn't have as thick a tree cover before white settlement as it does now. And there's some really interesting research around how trees have thickened up because we don't burn and we don't, the native species don't even get a chance to move around because they now aggregate around water points that we've put in. So you guys had it under control, Michael, and unfortunately that sort of burning regime and things with intensive farming and towns. It's unfortunate we can't do big burns around towns. People don't like it. It's funny about that. So some of the things that were being used aren't there anymore, and as farmers we're just trying to have a sustainable way so that we have grass cover, you hold your soils. We've got really native, fragile soils where we are, and we have to look after them and have grass cover and have the tree cover as well.
Ewan, how have you seen these practices change, you being a 5th generation farmer?
Yes, so looking probably even from great-grandfather or grandfather, the job was to go out and ring bark every tree sort of thing, just to open up those grasslands and get that more pasture development. Looking into, even grandfather changed his ways, my father especially, and even myself now. There is no way that we clear every single tree. We're just in the process at the moment of putting the whole place under improved pasture, and every habitat tree is kept, every timber tree is kept. We go around pockets of, like we call them cattle camps, which is just little pockets of trees. Every creek and natural environment, I suppose you could say, is left, and all we're actually doing is just rejuvenating the native pasture and turning it into an improved pasture. The tree clearing as such is a thing of the past, and my theory is that if we look after the land will look after us, and to keep it as sustainable as we possibly can, we won't go and rape and pillage, I suppose, that land and clear all the trees.
Michael?
Good point, because I just come back from, in March this year, with the climate change of the world out on country, and what they're offering the pastoralists to say 100,000 acres, fence it off, let the mulga and the natural plants grow back, then they're going to pay the pastoralists, and as traditional owners you can come out and get rid of all the feral cats and animals and feral plants that were brought here. As you know, you look around the ranges here, the feral plants we have, which don't belong to this country, and they're choking the country on it. So they talk about climate change. Well, who's going to benefit out of it? We understand that because, as Brother said, we talk about burning off the right times of year. And I see the other day they're starting to burn off now in the wintertime around here to save the population of Brisbane and the areas around for fire. Well, going back, how people did that. And when we're out on country and you see these 100-foot bloodwoods, they're just dying because our artesian basin has dropped, 70, 80%. So then this person out there says, I'll just suck the water out of the ground 700 metres and I'll put another 50 kilometres of hose out and then we'll do it that way. I said, it's no different to having 5 bore heads pumping at the same time where the water's not there. Then all our traditional lands, all the rivers, I walked down this creek and the bloke had been there 20 years and I showed him a campsite and clay ovens and everything. Then under a log there was I found a grinding stone. He'd been there 20 years and he wouldn't know what he was looking for. But if you don't see the forest for the trees, you're not going to see anything. But the point of the lady out around Mitchell, she 2 D10s in a 100-footer chain with a big ball, and they just took every stick. My brother said they pick which is going to save shade for the cattle, sheep, whatever, and let the natural grasses grow. Because way back before white men come, out in our country, there was 10 foot high of grass. And now people had huts, mud huts, and 50 tonne of storage of grain. And then they brought the cattle in, then they just pushed everything out of the way, let the grass grow and the cattle in. And what happened then? And the mine's now on top of it. So all that cattle country I grew up in, Charwell, Cunnamulla, Quilpie, Dad and them all drovers, and now you go out there and you see a few head of cattle here and a few head of cattle there, where it was the prime ministry of the West. People, our people were shearers, drovers, and they had a lot of money around in those days. Now the towns are dying, So when you talk about bringing back the trees, yeah, it's great that you can get a paddock and then bring it all back, let that one grow, then let this one grow. What they used to do years ago, they used to have spelling paddocks, and we used to work on it. The other day I heard a great point. This bloke said, well, we have to get rid of the kangaroos and emus because they're eating the grass in the spelling paddocks. I said, hello, mate, have a look, they're traditional. If you know the story of Yellowstone National Park, they told the story just lately. They took the wolves out, it started to fall apart, put the wolves back in, it's blooming. So we're going to take away porcupine, kangaroo, emu,
Sharks.
all that. So we have to look at it as the human race survival. Yeah, we can live, we can eat a bullock, we can eat that, but, let's do it in a professional way. Listen to the people that know, not the governments who think they know.
Yep.
Michael should have been with us.
Okay, Georgie, can I ask you then, is the land being used as well as it could be?
Oh, it's an interesting question, Kel, because the thing is what people have different perspectives. I sometimes get people sort of suggesting, and we went through this a bit in the drought, where people would say, well, the rain's fallen and you should be using that for a more effective thing than growing cattle. What do you suggest? Well, you should plant some crops or something like that because, you could get more meals out of that and it would be more effective and the rainfall use efficiency. Well, that's a fabulous idea on a map or in a paper. But if you come out to my country, you can't actually plough it. So I only have a couple of thousand acres that's what I would call arable land that we can actually work, and a lot of that we've put back under a tree that fixes legumes in this, fixes nitrogen into the soil. Most of our country, if we put a plough through it, the soil would fall away and we wouldn't have any soil the next year because it's very sandy, it's very fragile. We wouldn't. So the best thing you can do is grow a protein. So our choices are, and because of the types of native grasses, black speargrass isn't great with sheep, neither are the wild dogs that we have. So our choices really are cattle, potentially, could do buffalo or something. Goat are pretty good at running away from things, and kangaroos. And so what it comes back to is the most popular protein source that we can effectively grow in balance with that country is, and that's maintaining native grasses. We don't even have improved grasses in those properties, so we're just maintaining a mix of native grasses that hold the soil, tree cover, and we grow cattle. If we took the cattle out and destocked it, the trees would grow up more, but you'd have less grass, and the roos would actually struggle then as well because they wouldn't have as much feed. So it is about balance, and I think that's the thing. You can't say the best land, the best use is the same everywhere. I guess my biggest frustration is driving into Brisbane, and I prefer not to go down to Redlands because I just get really sad. I remember when it was all growing soil.
Strawberry farms.
Yeah. Buderim. I go to Buderim, and as a kid I used to go and visit my grandparents at Buderim, and that red soil up there, it's all covered in houses, but it was all, small crops. It was the most beautiful soil, and that's why we had Buderim ginger, because Buderim was covered in ginger plants. So for me, is the best use of the land these little boxes side by side on the way out past North Lakes, where it used to be it was called Mango Hill because we grew lots of mangoes. So I guess that's my other challenge, is that on the other side of the divide, we get questioned about how we're using the land, and I come down here and there's more housing developments, and yeah, it's pretty challenging. Kel?
Applause for that. And we do ask questions, but like questions you ask, they fall on, developers, we need homes. Whether that's a good answer or not is probably a topic for another day. Maggie, for you, as a scientist, what do you see as the concerns or challenges so much for the land and how we use it in Queensland?
Well, I think some of these challenges are certainly global. I've done research back in North America on these songbirds that are like 4 inches high, and they actually migrate between where I'm from in New England and Central and South America in the rainforests. And they use a very particular kind of habitat. They don't actually like forests. They use something called early successional habitat, which essentially is what you get, depending on the area, probably 15 years after burning. And so in the US, where I'm from, the power companies actually maintain these power line corridors, and they have this exact kind of habitat where they don't go through and mow it like a lawn, but they go through every once in a while and lop off the big trees and do a bit of maintenance so it doesn't grow through the phone poles and the power lines. So this is actually perfect habitat for these birds. And so what the research I was doing was looking at is it successful breeding habitat for these native species? But they're kind of native between two hemispheres as well, and two very different areas. I mean, the ground's frozen 6 months out of the year where I'm from. It's a lot different from Central American rainforests, but, they've made it work for all this time. So I think we have to kind of, again, be mindful of the fact that our idea of having huge forests everywhere isn't everyone's idea of utopia. I mean, there are some animals that already like it that way. So, I think that as we see things like climate change, we're going to see more extreme weather events. My mom rings me and she's worried about bushfires down in Adelaide, and I'm like, Ma, we gotta get a map out here, Ma. Like, we're way away from Adelaide, it's fine. Meanwhile, they are right on the water in New England, and they had 3 hurricanes. They had to be evacuated twice during hurricane season, and they got snowed in for more than 3 days, lost power. They're on a well, so they have no water. They wouldn't have had water. All the pipes would have frozen. They're on a generator 3 times for more than 3 days last winter.
And is that unheard of?
And she's
in that
worried about
area,
Adelaide. I'm like, well, y'all are 70 years old and you're sitting there in that house. And, this is when people have heart attacks every year because they're trying to shovel all that snow. So, it's just, my parents are seeing the same kind of extreme weather that we're going to have to deal with here. It's just on a very different, side of things. So you get more precipitation there. We get 12 years of drought. So in this global environment, I think we just have to be mindful of what works really well in Europe and North America and Canada and, where I'm from, probably isn't a real good fit for Australia. So, when we say things like we need to have more forests and more whatever, carbon imprint is obviously really important, and we need to manage, what we're taking out and what we're putting back in, and trees are a really efficient way to do that. But it may be that some of these areas are not the best fit for those trees. They might be better planted somewhere else.
Yeah. And the other thing with the carbon is that the trees are actually growing faster in places because of the carbon. So they need the carbon to grow, and they love it. And there's quite a bit of evidence about the speed at the rate at which some of them are growing now, because it is warmer and there's more carbon available for them to process.
Yeah, look at the tropics and subtropics are a whole different animal from anywhere else. The kind of
North
climate
Queensland
that we have here in Queensland and compared to other places, the legislation they're doing down south. I all the time I have other scientists say, "Can't you just go to Rockhampton for this conference?" I'm like, "No, I know I can't. Like, it's I could, but it's it's not like it's a half-hour drive away. So they're all in one place. I don't think they have the same certainly the appreciation for scale like we do in Queensland. So, when they talk about quotas and putting numbers and parameters around things, it's it should be a very different conversation from what we're having here up north. So that flexibility, I think, has to be built into policy a little bit better than it has been.
Well, with that, Ewan, as somebody who's always looking at new ways of doing things, how much can you take from an overseas experience and extrapolate it to what you're doing?
Simply don't make the same mistakes. As science and as the future of agriculture goes on, we, as a farming body, are forever changing and forever adapting, I think, to the climate. I think that if we just keep doing this and keep up to date with the newest technologies, we can keep going on and being sustainable and viable.
Well, that word keeps coming up, sustainable. What does sustainable mean to you, Ewan?
Well, you're talking to a 5th generation farmer. I'm hoping there'll be 20, 30, 40 generations. That's my hope. Just setting my son up for his son to keep going on and on and on. It's weird. Every day that I work for a much more efficient, a much more productive parcel of land, and therefore it'll be easier for my son, and hopefully he can improve and expand, and then it'll be easier for him, and so on and so forth.
What is the challenge of keeping young people like Ewan on the land, Georgie?
Well, see, I meet lots of Ewans because I actually think there are a lot of young people who want to work in agriculture. The challenge in regional communities, I think, is I talk about sort of the 17 to 25 bracket, and I actually think it's okay to go away and explore the world and see a few things. But what I've seen in our district is people come back when they want to raise a family because they want to come back to where they grew up. They want to share the same experiences. What Michael was saying, you want to show your kids what you did. You want to bring them along with you. They're not all going to come back, but we also can't sustain all of them to come back, particularly not in my group where most of them had 3 or 4 children. They just run out of properties. And there has been amalgamation around home, but in fact, there's 3 or 4 babies born in our district this year, which we think's fantastic. So it's not quite on the scale of 20, 30 years ago, but I do think that young people are returning. We've got a new thing being launched on Monday called the Rural Business Collective, which is about young entrepreneurs or just entrepreneurs in regional communities that are getting businesses going. There are all sorts of people, and with technology and being able to stay connected, it's made a huge difference to be able to stay connected to the rest of the world, but live where you want to live. I'll often drive down and back to Brisbane. I'll do an 8-hour drive, either come down late the night before, do a meeting, go straight home, or sometimes come down and go back in the same day. And sometimes the meetings are only 2 to 4 hours long, so I'll often drive 8 hours for a 4-hour meeting. But the benefit of getting back home it far outweighs me trying to stay down here and do other things. So I think, and I can do that because of technology. So I started off with a fax machine in 1988 when I first started going out there and had already started my own business. So what I can do now from a regional community is fantastic. So for young people, I think that makes a big difference. So as I said, we've got at least one who will definitely stay in the industry. The other one wants to work in a rural community. So not quite sure what the 15-year-old's decided yet. She has put a name on one of the properties. She said, "Oh well, I'm going to get that one, aren't I?" But I think it's just about having. Can you bags
the property?
Oh well, she bags the house anyway. I just think it's about the need to sort of communicate and provide opportunities, and it's one of the reasons why we marched today, and we had little kids marching today, because we want to provide a future for young people. And we actually want to provide some security. We borrow some fairly hefty amounts of money to do what we do, and to raise a family, to educate them, to try and do what we do better, and as Ewan was saying, keep the land in a better state than what we found it. And certainly, things have improved. I think our practices have improved over the previous generation. But I think that by being open and communicating and talking about that, we will have young people wanting to come back and work in our industry. And I think that's really exciting, and young people wanting to live in rural communities.
Is there sufficient research and development, Maggie, into sustainability and living off the land?
No, it's interesting. I looked at the grant data. So there's at the moment 2 major funding bodies for research scientists in Australia. One is called the NHMRC, the National Health and Medical Research Council. So they only fund clinical trials and treatments for humans. The other one is the Australian Research Council, and the ARC only funds things that don't work with humans from a medical perspective. So they fund all the social sciences, all the clinical, the preclinical science, and ag and veterinary science and all that kind of thing. So last year, the ARC, the one that only funds stuff that's not human medical research, gave out 3 grants across the entire country in the category of ag and vet sciences. 86% of Queensland, you may remember, is in drought at this time. None of them went to Queensland researchers, including people that had submitted grants specifically to work on drought tolerance in our crops. Those 3 grants had a total of probably $1.2 million across the 3, which is, sounds like a lot of money. For comparison, they funded 17 grants in the category of cancer research to the tune of probably $6 or $8 million. So
do we have to make this sexier?
It's already sexy enough. Look at this panel.
But I don't mean to sound like people shouldn't get research money for cancer, but
I
But,
mean,
you
we
know-
can cure cancer, but we still got to feed all the people we've just
Yeah.
cured, and we
And
ain't gonna be able
that's
to
the
do that
challenge, isn't it?
if we don't have some
Point
food.
well made.
So, I think that there's a larger conversation here. I think about sustainability that needs to happen, and how we think about sustainability. And I think, for me, as someone who's got a PhD in chemistry, and I hear a lot of people saying it's the chemicals that are. I mean, everything's a chemical. Water's a chemical. The air is a chemical. So I think it's about making sure that we have an appreciation for things like vaccines, which are incredibly important, particularly in remote and regional communities. People who have Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander background are much more affected by things like influenza. It's really important that all families who have kids get the whooping cough vaccine. Measles is incredibly affected. If you're on a train car with someone or you're near someone who has measles and you're not fully immunized, you'll have something like a 98% of chance of getting measles. It's one of those things that is such an old school disease that, my parents' generation had polio, and my parents knew people, that kids that got taken out of school and put in an iron lung. So for them, I mean, that generation has much more immediacy with the kind of chemistry, that Cold War era when people were really gung-ho about science and research and vaccination. And now I think we've kind of gone in the other direction, and people are saying we can't have chemicals, organic farming is much better. The reality is organic farming is often less productive, so you need more area to do the same amount of growing. It also traditionally used chemicals that, I wouldn't wish on anyone's worst enemy. Nicotine. It used something called rotenone, which they used to use in Central and South America. It comes from a plant, so totally natural. You grind it up, throw it in the water. It actually does something. It acts like it sucks all the oxygen out, and all the fish float to the surface, like putting dynamite in the water. So obviously, you get that into your waterways, and you got a real problem. So these are the kind of chemistries that were considered okay for organic farming. So for me, again, sustainability has to be about being the most appropriate that you can with the land that you have. In places like Australia, especially tropical and subtropical Australia, we don't have a lot of topsoil, so the area that actually grows your crops, which is why our native grasses and native plants are really hardy. In places like Central America, when people have needed to cut down large areas of rainforest to feed their families now with the kind of large monoculture crops that they've started growing. So they grow a lot of one particular kind of crop, which is different from their traditional cropping system, which used many different plants across, a different kind of range. They would put them in by certain trees and things like that. So their intercropping was actually pretty highly developed. So when they try to do things like grow stuff for export or put in rubber plantations or, ones that may use to make paper, when you put those in, the challenge is that when you burn them, that when you burn all those trees, it puts the carbon back into the soil. Your soil is quite rich for about 2 years, and then it's done. And because there's no topsoil, it just erodes off into places like the Amazon, ends up polluting the waterways in a massive way, and then it has an impact on your fish, and then further downstream, obviously on the ocean, when all of that silt runs off into the coral reef. So, I've lived in Hawaii as well, and, there it's volcanic. I mean, there's literally not a lot of soil there. So, again, I think sustainability is very location specific. Something that works well in one area will not work in another. And I think that, we need to be mindful of the chemistries we're using so they're appropriate, but I think we also need to find new ones that are going to lead us in the right direction. One of the challenges I always say to people about Australia and about Queensland is that, we have to do all the heavy lifting ourselves. The problems that we have here often don't exist anywhere else in the world. So if we're going to have research solve them, we need to have Australian researchers doing the stuff where we have the plants and the environment right here and we can do the work. And I think that's the challenge, is that there's no lab in America that's going to come in and help us with, cattle tick or paralysis tick or anything, because they don't have the same thing there. So, we need to be, I think, funding some of that innovative stuff if we want our farmers to survive. Obviously, if nobody cares about that anymore and we're just going to turn the whole thing into something else, that, that's kind of what it feels like our options are with funding this innovative research, or just continuing to fund things that are, much closer to end stage research where industry partners will come and say, I want to do this, and they'll, find a way to innovate a machine. So I think both things are important, but I think what we're lacking is our kind of ag moonshot, like they have for cancer at the moment.
Yeah, it's interesting, Kelly. I mean, it's a real luxury to be able to sit here and talk about sustainability and food choices and organic food. We're very blessed in Australia, particularly in Queensland, with our access to fresh food. The Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation have actually got involved with research around sorghum out on the Darling Downs, because they see the importance of the Queensland's ability to grow drought tolerant and to grow greater productive capacity of the same area for developing nations who are starving. You know, and even the figure this morning from Food Bank at the Ekka breakfast was, 1 in 6 Australians will go hungry at some stage this year. So, they're pretty big numbers even in our own country for people who are going hungry. So the sustainability thing is also about, and the research piece, I think, is about trying to do what we do now even better. So producing more. We focus on how many kilos can we produce by not running any more cattle, but improving our genetics and improving what we do and how we look after them, the low stress stock handling and those sorts of things. And in cropping, it is about better growth rates with less rain, or harsher temperatures. I mean, that's the other thing. It's not just about rainfall. It's actually about temperature impact, and there's some really interesting work happening in wineries. Because the heat has a really big impact. So it was warm on the Southern Downs the other day, and they're a bit worried about the crop this year. But in South Australia, it's been really warm, and it's getting it's like 0.6 of a degree hotter for 3 more days when they're harvesting. And so they've done some really interesting work, in fact, taken some technology from the sugar industry, and they're doing some really clever use of technology with apps to monitor, and they put a drone up and they actually have a look at what needs fertilising and what doesn't need fertilising to try and even out as things are maturing close to that time when they're going to have their peak temperatures. So some really interesting and very clever stuff happening in agriculture. But this is not about small scale. This is actually about large scale. This is about feeding the world. We've got the capacity to grow Queensland's agriculture to 30 billion from 17 billion. But that is also part about doing what we do smarter, investing in people like Maggie so that we don't have cattle ticks in the future. Those sorts of things, and growing more where we can so that Kelly can have a nice house on nice soil down in Brisbane.
Michael Connolly, can I ask you, we cling to the coast, Australians. We love the coastal areas. What do we miss out on by not travelling to the interior?
Freedom, cleaner air, and I think it's mainly, as I said, I grew up around Charlotte, Cunnamulla, so as I said, went out there was plenty of work, there was Grove and Sheeran, there was heaps, there was 9 pubs, 4 clubs, 5 football teams, there was so
I've
much
lived
sport.
in Charleville.
Yeah.
Lots of good pubs.
Yeah, and I said, so we all come to the coast because we think that there's more work, there's more money to make, there's that. But we get here and you have a look, there's no work. In the West, there's no work now because they've taken away all the prime ministries. Like I was out there, 15, 20 years ago, and they started dozing all this scrubland and setting up these lot feed cattle places. Calder Vale was one. They took this hill and they just took all the big iron barks and took them all and cleaned them all up. And I said, what are they doing this for? Oh, lot feed cattle. They bring them in, they fatten them and go on. And I suppose now, I haven't been back for a while, but the person that had it, he died. So I don't know what happened to the property. I suppose now it's that thick you can't ride a horse through. But that's happened in the West. And I was out in Charles there in November last year. And to the west going to Quilpie, they've dozed all this boxland. Oh, I got it the grass grow, but they've dozed it and done nothing with it. They haven't burned it and ploughed it back in or whatever, and they've left it. So now, when we were in Musselman as young fellas, they used to push all that country, that mulga country and box country, and you couldn't put a dog in there because he had a stick in his mouth. It was that thick, and trying to muster get cattle and sheep out of it, you virtually had to get dogs and go and run out and run them out yourself because we couldn't get them out because they'd come through, dozed it, then decide they're going to do something else, and then it's all growing back. So, we talk about sustainability, country, native title, with Dale Chapman now. She's an Aboriginal chef. She's a Coomera Ullaroy woman, and she's going out now working with traditional owners to find out what natural food is left on country so we can either propagate it, put it back in the country to find out why it's there and why it hasn't been eaten or been trodden in the ground. You go across that country like Tobermory Station south of Quilpie where Dad and them grew up and were drovers and cattlemen, and that country now is so just that hard, it's like that there. And the cattle have walked it in, and they said it's got to just let Mother Nature and the rain come and break it up a little bit so it can sort of come back a little bit and let the grass grow on the creeks and let it blow away, the wind blow it back in, let Mother Nature put her own seeds out, and the dust storms which they've out in the bush, you can remember them for weeks, dust storms. That's just laying the land and then let the rain come and let it all grow back. But, just watch it, let it talk to it, it'll tell you the story, but, no one seems to do it. But now, as Sister said up here about the young ones that are leaving the bush now out on Womban Station, all his family are left because he had to sell the property because no one wants to go out there and sit there when there's not much money in cattle, there's no money in sheep, and they're not going to sit out there and chase wild dogs and nothing happening. You know, like Sheeran said, there used to be 10 or 12 stands when I was a young fella. Well, now they're just sitting there rotting away. You can go out and buy the timber out of it because it's beautiful timber. But that's it. Our prime ministries, the West could be used for wineries. It could be used for planting up fruit trees because we're buying fruit out of America. Hello? You know, we've got 1 million acres in the back country. Now, the Cooper Basin, and all that rain from the north now, it'll be down in a few months. The Cooper Basin, where I come from, hooked up with the Rockemer people beside us, that'll be a perfect place to put out wineries, put out anything sort of get it growing.
We also waste a lot of food. I think most of us have heard about the wastage we have with our food. How much would you, like there might be some very good people in here who don't do that, but you know, you get to that point and you think, oh my God, I need to clear out the fridge. And it gets to the point of being, well, at my house, a little bit embarrassing. But I'm sure I'm not alone in that, because when we know that our farmers will plough, you know, quite a goodly percentage of their crops back into the ground because it's not pretty, that the apples weren't round and shiny, that there was something wrong with them. Yeah. Do we need to change our attitudes as well, Georgie?
Oh, I'd love to see people change their attitudes about perfect fruit and veg, but I actually think that through organisations like Food Bank, we're doing a whole lot better job of that as well, and that was, you know, some of the conversation this morning was around some of the supply chains where farmers are supplying that sort of produce. But absolutely, and this is my point, is that consumers... a friend was who grows citrus was in Fiji recently, and she said, wow, I wish I could sell citrus like they do in Fiji. They've got spots on them and they're funny shapes and they're not all perfect, you know, mandarins and oranges. But our market doesn't accept that. So we're very selective. We can be fussy because we have such abundance right here in Australia. But it would be wonderful if people would accept that more. I mean, it takes, you know, 4 to 5 years to put a steak on someone's plate, and to think that, you know, someone eats half a steak and then says, oh, I'm not terribly hungry, I'll just throw the other half out. And I says, oh, well, that could be salad tomorrow, it could be your sandwiches, it could be, you know, for my son that would be breakfast or just a nibble. But if you think about how long it's taken for some of that food to grow, that you then just put in the bin, it becomes a wet waste problem for Brisbane City Council. There's a whole responsibility there at both ends. But certainly it takes a lot to put food on plates. Yeah.
Well, for Ewan, for you, as a beef farmer, do you look at that waste sometimes and think, come on, you know, be respectful at least of the work that's gone in here? Or once you get there, you know, you've got the dollar, you're good. Do with that what you want.
I grew up in a family of 6 children, so there was absolutely no waste whatsoever. I'm the last twin on the line, and whatever was left, it was sort of look around the table and who's going to get it. To waste food as such, there has been a lot of blood, sweat, and tears put into it. There's a lot of hours in the day that we spend. It's up before sunrise and home at dark. An appreciation for that food, I think, is, and getting people to know where that food comes from, and what's been put into it. Get a bit of a story about what's the story, the production line of what it took to get that vegetable, grain, anything there. Get people aware, I suppose, yeah.
Kelly, I wanted to come back to your point about what are you missing in inland Queensland, because I grew up near Winton, and I'm a little bit passionate about Big Sky country. And has anybody here not been west of Toowoomba? Okay, so we've got there's one brave hand. You'll have some people listening to this. That if you haven't been out west, and it don't even have to go all the way out to Charleville and Longreach, but you'll want to once you get a little bit west. But there is something pretty magical. You get past Toowoomba and you get to Dalby, and there's just a bit of a point somewhere sort of west of Dalby, around Chinchilla Miles, where...
Muckadilla,
yeah, you know, but the landscape opens up. Yeah. And I call it the Big Sky thing. You know, I don't even have the huge landscapes that I grew up with at Winton, but I still get that chance to go outside, and my kids come and get me they still come and get me when there's a fantastic sunset or there's the moon's rising or whatever, a bit of a sunset tragic. But it is that feeling of space, and it's just so worthwhile getting in the car. And you only have to go a few hours and you start to get that expansive feeling. Come up into the South Burnett. It is just beautiful country. We have wineries as well, Kelly.
Yep.
Beautiful wineries. So, it's really worth, and I think that's what you miss if you just cling to the coast in Queensland. And I sort of lament, I'm a bit more reconciled with it these days that tourists often just do the coast in Australia because we've got so much to see and share in the inland.
Yeah. We might get to your questions now, seeing as we're nearly at 7 o'clock. Does anyone have a question for the panel? Wait a minute. Well, I think there's another mic coming up. Is there? Yeah, Tom's coming down. So I'll pass this to you.
Hi guys, my name is Beck. I work for the Queensland Farmers Federation. I just wanted to ask, you all sort of touched on communicating better and talking about the links between country and ag. And I just sort of wanted to know, given the disconnect between the regional sector and potentially consumers or the city community, how do we better communicate about sustainable agriculture and counteract the misunderstanding of the negative sentiment that unfortunately is a little bit out there at the moment, Georgie? How do we better communicate so that we don't have to march down George Street and bang on the door of Parliament? How do we better communicate that sustainability is something that we do really well?
Thanks, Ewan. Look, I'm a great believer in listening and storytelling. So I think that it is about hearing, there are just as many pressures and people buy what they buy and think what they think because of what they've grown up with. But each of us as farmers has a responsibility to share our stories as well. And that's probably why I said yes to coming down tonight, because it is just a chance to tell our story, that we're no different from families in the city. We're just doing what we do. We try and do the best of it. But I think we actually have to have those conversations and also try and dispel some of the myths that are out there around what we do and the sort of the climate that we live with. Like Maggie was saying, the climate in Queensland is so abundant, it grows anything. And I guess the really hard thing is that it's and we're using social media a lot more effectively, I think, as farmers. But it's not really sexy to tell good stories in the media. Kelly's one of the few people who tells good stories. And to be honest, the ABC do tell great stories and they share our stories. But mainstream media aren't that excited about telling the good stories about what's going on and what we are doing well. So we're relying on all of you to go and tell at least 3 or 4 people what a fantastically cracking good job farmers are doing. But also, just about country and about feeling that as well.
Michael, do you want to say something?
Just talk about a story, because we're all good storytellers. And they're all true stories too, by the way. Many years ago, I was telling the story this afternoon to gentlemen that we had mustard cattle, and we had a bronco yard, which is the big yard. You put them in, you brand them, get ready to load them on, get rid of them out for the sale. And we had these girls come down from Gladstone, and we said, we better go to the pub. We've got to the roadhouse 20 mile away and get a bottle of rum in the cart, and we're going to have a barbecue. And they said, that's good. So we grabbed a 303 out of the back of the ute and shot this bullock in the head and dropped to the ground, cut his throat. And they said, what are you going to do with that? We said, we're going to eat it. And they said, we're not eating that. I said, well, you can't get any fresher than that. So we skinned it back and cut the rumps off, and the rumps was on the front of the grill, and we're still jumping, and they're going, and we're sitting there, and the boys all got knives and forks and the salt and pepper and the black sauce and a rum bottle there. This is going to be good. And they went, you're going to get sick. I said, no, we're not. This is fresh. So they wouldn't have anything to eat. So all that night, we partied and had plenty of steak and got all the curly gut and the sweet bread, and we boned it all out and threw it amongst the gum leaves and threw them back at the car, and we're pinching each other off each other to see who get the most meat. And next morning we get to town, then up the cafe, and they bought a hamburger. And I said, you're kidding me? I said, they've been walking on that mince for about a week. And they rolled it up, and God knows what else they put in it. And they said, yeah, but at least we know it's out of a shop. So you talk about education. Yeah. Take a person out to the bush, shoot a roo, hang it up, skin it, take the rumps off a roo, put it in the camp oven, bit of meat, put it in the camp oven, and cook it and get up and get some, you can get all the yams and all the natural fruit and put in there, cook a feed up, and then tell a good story. And I think as humans, as I said first off, we don't do enough of it. You ask the kids, where's milk come from? It's out of a bottle, you know. And you look around and you ask any, like the grandkids or whatever, if we don't educate them, well, who's going to educate them? You know, McDonald's or Hungry Jack's? You see, yeah, this is the point. We talk about how we do it. Well, we've let ourselves down by not educating the future of our human race in Australia by showing where you can get honey from out of the tree, you can get meat dropped to the ground, you can eat it straight away, you can put it in the camp oven, you can salt it, you can do all that, corn it. Because I grew up, and Mum had a wood stove that never stopped burning, a Gidgee wood stove, and we had stews and curries made for the winter, and Dad said, 2 more for dinner, throw a bit more rice in or something, you know. So we just kept adding to it, and then throw the bones away when there's nothing left. So, you know, we lived on that most of our lives. And the Mum had a garden, we had fruit trees, I think the old house in the bush, the old shack, I think you still got the old garden trees, the old fruit trees are still there. And they've been sitting there for, well, I'm 60, so at least 50 years. You know, so this is the thing is, we grew up that way, and everybody in the bush grew up that way. But we've lost that communication with the earth, with the tucker, and what it is, and we've lost it. Even my own people, you know, they've even lost track of bush tucker. They wouldn't know what it was. Our bush medicine, I'm going out on Saturday week to get some good bush medicine and bring back because it's supported of the way I eat and I live healthy. And, you know, I want to live because I want to live to be 100 because Mum's whole family, they weren't registered, and one of our old aunties was about 105, but they didn't know. And she just lived in the old shack, and she ate all the fresh tucker and got a bit of meat and cooked it up in the camp oven or whatever, you know. So this is what's missing. The real rigid ditch fellas from the bush having a feed. And if you ask all your Morbi, I'm just looking at you, how you were brought up. Stews, curries, throw this in, a bit of corn flap, you know. We used to feed it to the dogs. Now they sell it at a restaurant for $50. You know?
The old lamb shank.
Yeah, the lamb shank.
Yeah.
There was another question just over down here. Hi.
Hello. Yeah. I'd like to get you to reflect on food security for people in Queensland and as people in the food industry on the land. Coming from two different sides. One is keeping the farms and food producing industries in Australian hands, and also the food contracts, where the food goes. So with the food industry, are you seeing it as something that you're selling food to overseas? Are you thinking about feeding Queenslanders? I have heard from nutrition experts in Queensland a figure which I still find hard to get my head around of 90,000 people already in North Brisbane who are what they call food insecure. So I know personally that there's a whole lot of food that we can't afford to buy. And we really would traditionally, it was the food we ate, like roast lamb, can't afford to buy it. Most of the beef cuts we can't afford to buy. Most of the fish we can't afford to buy. And absolutely there are huge numbers of people out there. At the same time, this same food is getting exported big time. Who is looking after making sure that Queenslanders are fed first? We've got the same problem with gas. We've got so much natural gas, and yet already our power industries do not have access to the gas because it's all being exported. Is that going to happen with our food? Can you guarantee our food supply?
No, absolutely not.
Well, I can guarantee my own food supply because I can grow it. But I think it's a really interesting point, and it's interesting that I'm starting the day having listened to Jeff Starr from Food Bank and hearing your story. We're really conscious of how expensive some of the protein sources are now. It's actually, you know, we at the moment are having record prices for cattle, and sheep have been going through that for a couple of years, but certainly for cattle. And there's a mixture of factors there. There is the low Australian dollar on the export, but there's also the restocking pressure. So people in Western Queensland have had rain, and they're wanting to build their herd back up. And the Australian cattle herd is at the lowest that it's been in many years. And so some of the cattle that might have gone to slaughter are now going back to breed, you know, and restock those properties. So I guess as a producer, I'm really conscious of what's happening there, and I've also been involved at a retail level with meat as well. I don't think we can guarantee anything. I think that we're really aware in agriculture of how much foreign investment we have in our supply chains in terms of our processes. So this is one of the few times when the meat processors are taking more pain than the beef producers. But I think what is emerging is some stronger local cooperatives. There's actually a push nationally at the moment to rebuild some of the cooperative structures, which we used to have quite strongly in the dairy industry. There is a push to get cooperative structures going again. There is certainly a push in areas that are growing horticulture to collaborate more and to supply local markets and to have local supply chains that are guaranteed and assured, and outside of the three major supermarkets who have an enormous amount of power over what actually makes it to your table. They really do determine what is grown and the size of it and so forth. And I don't think there are any guarantees. I think what we have to be aware of is really, and this is one of the reasons why we were walking today, is that we want to be sure that we can keep producing enough food in Queensland, because if we start to have large areas where we can't have future development, and I'm talking here about North Queensland where there are tracts of land, areas of 500,000 acres that could do fantastic horticultural crops that could give us more abundance and more diversity, which will enable more access to it for people like yourselves. But if that's just growing trees, there won't be any other options to grow something else there, and we won't have we simply won't be able to increase the herd. We won't be able to have more diversity of horticulture cropping zones, and horticulture is obviously a very big one in that area as well. So I don't think there's any guarantees in life. What I think we need to do is have strong policies that enable agricultural businesses to be strong and to retain business and to keep families in farming. Families, to me, they make up the majority of the Australian beef industry, and family farming is the backbone of Australian farming.
Maggie?
Yeah, I would just say as well that I think resistance is a really big problem for a few different reasons. So we're seeing now the first instances in other countries of antibiotic resistance moving from animals into people. It's a massive problem. Something like 1 in 6 Queenslanders is affected by drug-resistant infection at the moment. So things where you get an infection that's acquired in the hospital or somewhere else, and it can't be treated with antibiotics. So, that has a much higher impact in remote and regional communities. I also work on insecticide resistance, so it's when we use the same kind of chemistries and the same targets over and over again, and we don't have the technology to vary those at the moment. So when you do things like deregister an insecticide that you don't like because it's harming something, environment or honeybees or whatever, and that it's a valid concern, absolutely. That means you've eliminated the ability of growers to use that at all. We have essentially one fumigant at the moment that we use for export, so there's only one thing that we can use to get our crops and our products overseas. We have a massive problem with insecticide resistance. I do a lot of work in biosecurity as well, so things like flies and fly strike is a really big problem, and that's going to be, as our climate changes and warms more down south, you will see this spread to southern states, which they're already starting to see. They've got blue tongue in the UK at the moment, and I would be very surprised if we don't have it soon. So, with the global movement of people and livestock, we're going to see a lot more of those diseases coming in. We really need to be prepared from a biosecurity perspective. And all of those things, like when you have large amounts of fly strike, that reduces the number of sheep that you have for sale. It causes abortions in pregnant mothers as well, so the number of live births that you have goes down. The number of calves, when you have a lot of cattle tick on a cow, it makes it hard for the mother to produce enough milk. So you either wean them early or the babies just die because they don't have the milk, full stop. So, a lot of the problems that we already have, again, they're Australian problems and they require Australian solutions. So one of the reasons that I would say we can't guarantee, the security of what's happening with our food supply is because we don't have good technologies to manage the existing problems, which are likely to grow in the future.
Ewan?
Yeah, so just from a producer perspective, we work on a supply and demand factor. And I just urge everyone in the city and metropolitan areas is to support the local farmer and really get behind us all, because the government certainly isn't. And like just from that supply and demand factor, well, we could supply tenfold more food for our country and for other countries as well, if we just had that support behind us.
All right, one more question. Yeah.
Yeah, I've got a... I've got a question about the dairy farming, and I know you were talking about the amount of people that, or it's really the duopoly of the shops that stop or have started this $2 milk war that has created chaos for the dairy farmers, and the dairy farmer pays for them getting prices for their milk that they got 10 years ago, and their payments out for electricity and costs of feed and other things is just extortionate. So why would you want to stay in dairy industry when you're not getting any support? It's terrible.
Can I add to that? Because I think that's a really valid question. Recently we saw that movement where people went, nah, we're not going to buy it. And they actually bought milk that was from their local area if they could, or they bought the more expensive brand because they realised that, wait a minute, this isn't sustainable. This can't go on because it's just not right. Of this duopoly that we have with Coles and Woolworths, how much is that harming Australian agriculture as well?
It has a significant impact on Australian agriculture in every area, and that's what I was saying before. I mean, for the dairy industry, they've actually had a degree of protection and being able to forward plan. The rest of agriculture has been riding that roller coaster for a long time. So when you were getting cheap meat, we weren't being paid much. So it's expensive at the moment. We're being paid a bit. We can put it away for the times when it's tough, and that's what we have to do. The power actually lies with all of you. The duopoly's cheap milk only works because people go and buy it. So the choice actually lies with the consumers. And while we keep blaming the duopolies, it is actually up to the consumers. So it was it was people like The Project who actually came out and said, sorry, Kel, but it was because commentators came out and said you need to choose these products because this is really impacting dairy farmers. It's not as clear cut in some other industries, but the power actually does lie with consumers, and that's why your conversations and your barbecue stoppers are just as important for us, because you're the ones who will have those conversations and say, what are you buying this milk for? I mean, I say it. I go to an office and say, what are you home brand milk for? You don't buy this stuff. You get the real stuff. And pull people up when you see that they're choosing that. Have those conversations because they might not understand. And when people are complaining about the price of meat, just explain that it's helping pay off the years of education that I've paid for and just paying down a bit of that debt and getting me ready for the next drought. The duopoly strength is only there because consumers go along for the ride. And the more that we can share our stories about, how to choose and how to be more effective in your choices, how to support things outside the duopoly, support your IGA. You can have conversations with those guys about where they actually get their produce from. Support your strip butcher shop. He probably knows where those cattle came from. He's probably been using the same wholesaler for 30 years. Actually make some choices with your own feet and your own wallet, and don't abrogate the responsibility to a duopoly.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone. I hope you enjoyed this evening's conversation, Queenslanders in Conversation. And I'd love a really big round of applause for our guests this evening, Michael Connolly, Dr. Maggie Hardy, Ewan Rockemer, and Georgie Somerset. And thank you as well. You'll each get an email if you booked on Eventbrite with the next one. And also, I think you're getting a link to this conversation, so you can have a listen back if you want to. Thank you very much. I'm Kelly Higgins-Devine. It's been great having you here. Thank you.